Hi, I'm Jeff Richardson. I'm the County Executive for Albemarle County Government. And thank you for tuning in to learn more about the proposed fiscal year 27 budget. I'd like to introduce to you the elected officials for Albemarle County local government. I'll start top left and work my way down the page. First top left is Ann Malik. She is in her 5th term from the Whitehall District. To her right is Ned Galloway. He is our current chair and in his 3rd term representing the Rio District. Middle of the page is Sally Duncan. She is in her 1st term. She is representing the Jack Jewett District. To her right is B. Lepisto Kirtley. She is in her 2nd term and she is representing the Ravenna District. And at the bottom is Fred Missel. He is in his 1st term, Samuel Miller District, and then followed bottom right by Mike Pruitt, who is also in his 1st term, and he's representing the Scottsville District. These 6 board members make up the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors. As County Executive, I report to this board, and I will be talking about the recommended budget that the board is currently considering for next fiscal year. This presentation will consist of 3 sections: key principles in budgeting, an overview of the proposed budget, and then I want to share with you a look at some of our key investments. So let's go to the first section and let's look at some key principles that we use to develop our budget. This is a graphic that we use in a lot of our community town halls, and it's what we think the community gauges when they think of how county government is doing. This is any local government, not just Albemarle County, but let me share with you a couple of thoughts about each of these lenses. The first lens at the top is economic vibrancy. I believe what that means is that really is the health and the strength of mainly our local economy. Our citizens oftentimes think of that in terms of job availability, quality jobs, quality pay, purchasing power, the ability when you move here for a spouse to get a job, as well as what does the community offer specific to retail, commerce, trade. How far do you have to drive to get the services or the goods that you need? The second way is through the service delivery lens, and that is more specific to county government and how we relate to our customers, our policies, our response times, our systems that we use to process the work that we do to serve our community. And then finally, quality of life. I think that's a real subjective term, and if we were in a community meeting asking citizens to tell us what is most important to you about this community, we would get a wide range of answers. Things like short commute times, or a feeling of safety, or easy access to parks, strong schools. These are just examples of what we've heard when we've gone into the community and asked these questions. We keep all of these in mind as we put our budget together, as we work with our board to address the priorities and issues in our community. The county also puts strategies and policies in place that helps to guide where and how decisions are made so that our work aligns with infrastructure capacity, service delivery, and long-term planning. Quickly, I'll just hit all 3 of these documents. To the far right, AC 44. That is our 20-year comprehensive plan. We just updated that with the board's hard work. And what that really talks about is future growth and what that growth looks like in our community, what is good growth and where it appropriately belongs. That can guide critical infrastructure, public water, public school. It can also guide investments and partnerships with private sector, as well as other issues related to quality of life. In the middle of the page, you see the county's 5-year strategic plan. Our board has worked very hard with staff to identify our 6 top goals that we want to positively affect over the 5-year period. Those 6 goals have to do with opportunities, but they also may have to do with critical issues and problems that we need to face based on data and data measurement that helps to drive where our resources go. Finally, to the left is our Economic Development Strategic Plan. This also was recently updated. Our Economic Development Strategic Plan goes into detail about what does good economic development look like in Albemarle County. It's not the same in every community, and certainly Albemarle County has worked hard to be able to balance the environment, sustainability, but also with economic vibrancy. Good paying jobs, good industry, good commerce, but it is identified as to where it should go, what it should look like that fits in best for Albemarle County. Beyond our plans, we also have sound financial policies. The board maintains a set of financial policies, and we adhere to those policies. I want to really hone in on the most important policy, I think, and that is our commitment to AAA bond rating, which is the highest level of rating that you can get in local government. That allows us to borrow money at the lowest possible rate. 54 counties in the entire United States enjoy a AAA bond rating, and the county has worked really hard to maintain that. 13 of those 54 are in Virginia. Virginia is known as a good local government state, and we are proud of the fact that in our community, not only we carry the AAA bond rating, but also the city of Charlottesville does, as well as the University of Virginia. So that helps to send a message to our community that we have a strong economic vibrancy here, that we want to work hard to balance our fiscal policies with smart growth. And we do that, I believe, in a very good way to be able to take our dollars and make them stretch as far as they can go. Tax-based diversification has been an issue in this community that our board has helped to guide a conversation with our staff over the last several years. This slide in front of you right now really breaks down our tax base by property type. I want to go through it really quickly, but I want to make a couple of key points as it relates to our key strategies to keep the community affordable. Look at residential and multifamily. In 2015, that represented about 2/3 of the tax base, 65.3%. It has now grown to 73.6%. That is new development and increased assessed value. I want you to look at the far right column. That's really important because for every dollar we receive on residential and multifamily, on average, it costs $1.31 to serve that part of our community. If you look at the bottom and highlighted in yellow, by contrast, commercial and industrial tax base, it has diminished from 2015 from 15% to 11.3%. That's not because businesses and commerce have left the county at an alarming rate. It's just not grown as fast as residential and multifamily. And then if you look at the far bottom right square, it says the cost for service. For every dollar we receive, it costs us approximately 32 cents to serve. So therein lies our revenue capacity. And over the course of time, we want to take a strategic approach to carefully grow that 11.3% back into the 15 to 18% range. And that will do a couple of things. It will relieve the residential tax burden to some degree, and it will give us more revenue capacity to address more of the opportunities and problems that are outlined in our strategic plan. Our commitment to performance improvement and cost savings, that's also a key piece of how we do our work in Albemarle County. We continually look for continuous improvement and modernization to advance programs and service delivery within the county to ensure a return on investment of our people, processes, and systems. We pay attention to how much things cost. We measure things with an eye on improving performance. We do things like modernize our systems, do good training of our people to be able to maximize those systems once they're brought online. We also utilize staffing studies in order to make changes for efficiency. We do performance measurement. We provide an annual analysis report to our board and to our community on our strategic goals, on how we're doing. And then finally, we re-engineer vacant positions in order to make sure we're hiring positions that really meet the needs that we have at that time. In the last 2 years, we have cut 17 vacant positions out of our budget. With those 17 positions, we've turned around and hired 14 public safety positions over that time. That has left us with a net 3 in position numbers over the last 2 years. So we've cut in some areas, we've added in some areas, and that's based on the data that helps inform our decisions. Now I'm going to take a few minutes and I'm going to talk about the county's proposed tax rates, its expenditures obligations, and the county's multi-year planning efforts, as well as talk a little bit about where our revenues come from. Let's take a look at the balancing considerations. The Board of Supervisors has been holding public meetings and thoroughly reviewing the county's budget for the past month. But the building of the budget started months before then. This slide illustrates many of the things that the county government has to weigh when developing a balanced budget. By state law, I have to recommend a budget to the Board of Supervisors that is balanced every year. When we start this process back in the fall of the year, we look at national and state economic conditions, and we also look at our local economy. We look at revenues and revenue projections on how things are coming in. I don't have to tell you that right now we have concerns and we're keeping an eye on the changing federal landscape. There is more uncertainty in the world right now, and we don't know how impacts around the globe will affect our local economy in the future. Local revenues are continuing to grow based on the strong local economy, and public schools are receiving increased state funding, though that's not guaranteed in future years. The county does multi-year long-range financial planning to determine if the decisions made today can be afforded tomorrow. That's a big factor in that how we look at out-year obligations to be able to determine what our revenue, what our future revenue and expense picture may look like. The budget for next year is balanced on the proposed real estate tax rate of 89.4 cents per $100 of assessed value. That's the same rate as the current year. The board's proposed 27 budget also includes an increase of 15 cents to the personal property tax rate. This rate includes personal property, business tangible personal property, and machinery and tools. The two bottom taxes that are on the page, food and beverage and transit occupancy, are to remain unchanged at this time. I want to talk about obligations. You heard me just a few minutes ago mention out-year obligations. We do multi-year budgeting. We have to budget annually. I have to present a balanced budget to the board, and then ultimately the board, if it makes changes, it still must vote on a balanced budget going from one year to the next. But when I talk about out-year expenses, really we're looking at the decisions that we make from one year and then how that impacts us in future years. Decisions from previous years and commitments we make on obligations, infrastructure, projects that can create out-year obligations related to debt service or payments or operating costs. So in fiscal year 27, we will continue to pick up some costs that previous policy decisions have been made, and it has out-year obligations. Here are some specific obligations that we will pick up in fiscal year 27, as other planned expenses will require local funding. Examples include the operating cost associated with 2 new schools, as well as picking up the cost associated with expiring FEMA SAFER grants in our Fire and Rescue Department. Key partner agency agreements also continue to grow, and they're listed here on the page. Changes at the federal level continue to shift revenues, particularly for some of our partner agencies. The fiscal year 27 budget includes increased funding for some of our partner agencies, and that will make up for some of the federal lost revenue and will help to maintain services for our community. The budget will see another increase in the revenue sharing agreement with the city of Charlottesville, which has continued to grow continually over the past several years. The projected payment for next year, fiscal year 27, is $21.9 million to the city of Charlottesville. Okay, I'm going to take a minute and with our 5-year projected revenue outlook, and I want to talk about shorter term, which is on the left side of the page, and then I'll talk about longer term, because it's really 2 different pictures. There's 2 periods within the next 5 years. And in the shorter term, for fiscal year 27 and 28, as I've said, we're going to keep an eye on a changing federal landscape and the concerns we have there. We're going to take a look at how that could affect state funding through Virginia, as well as the federal relationship, and then finally our local economy. Said another way, we need to be conservative and keep an eye really close on revenues and expenditures for the next 2 years. We have significant expenditure obligations that we've got to maintain. When you look in the longer term picture in fiscal year 29 through 31, we see a little bit of a favorable changing tax base. We have continued obligations, and we will continue to meet those obligations. But when we look at projected revenues, it looks better. And this is due to some recent industry announcements, and we believe that if everything else stays certain, that we could advance more of the board's strategic priorities. Multi-year tactics. I've talked a little bit about how we do multi-year budgeting in order to be able to not just balance in the current year, next year, but really we're looking 2 to 3 years out. An example of what we've done is that we are going to use a funding bridge for next year, fiscal year 27, as well as fiscal year 28. These are the 2 years that are most conservative at this time. And we have a budget stabilization reserve. It's 2% of our budget. And I'm recommending that we borrow a 0.5% for next year, which is about $3 million, and then another 0.5% in fiscal year 28, which is again another $3 million. And then once we get out to years 3 through 5, as I said previously, we should see revenues increase and our obligations should be steady. I'll also mention that I am recommending a transfer to the CIP of $6.4 million. Our CIP is our capital improvement program, and by taking $6.4 million and moving that into a CIP reserve, it can plan for future projects, and I would hope that we would look at that maybe in years 3 through 5, but also it really is a safety net if something unexpected happens with state or federal funding specific to our school system. We work very hard with our schools to make sure that they've got the money they need to operate on a year-to-year basis. And this $6.4 million in the CIP reserve can begin to plan for future capital needs, but again, it can also serve as a safety net if something unexpected happens with revenues coming from the state or federal government over the next several years. We tend to focus on the general fund budget whenever we look at the county's overall budget. And there's several reasons why. It's where we collect all tax revenue, as you can see on the page. It's the primary funding source for schools as well as our capital and debt. And then finally, it's where the Board of Supervisors has the maximum amount of policy discretion if they want to move money around in the budget and be able to address things that they may not feel is adequately addressed in the recommended budget. And as you can see, we are balanced on a $513.7 million budget. And as we look at general fund revenues, which also have to be at that same amount, you can see that we're balanced again on $513.7 million. If you look at the donut on the largest expenditure that's in the general fund, it is our local transfer to public schools, which is $218.3 million, and it equates to 43% of the general fund budget. Okay, we're now to part 3 of this presentation, and I'm going to take a minute and go into key investments. And some of my commentary may be a little long for some of the pages, but it's because we've got several things that we're really highlighting as a key part of this budget. So I'm going to step through the key investments. I'm going to try to talk about the services, the initiatives, and tie it back to our strategic plan. So I'll first talk about the police department. We recently undertook a comprehensive public safety staffing study that assessed our police and fire rescue departments to ensure that we are being as effective as we can be. These expert consultants come in and they look at industry standard, they look at best practices, they make multiple recommendations that really should be considered over the next 5 to 7 years as we try to take advantage of these best practices, look and do the best we can do with the money that we have. It's a multi-year implementation strategy, and that's what we are into currently. This budget provides funding for fiscal year 27 for 3 new police officer positions to support public safety. These new officer positions, along with previous additions and investments over the past 2 years, will continue to help ensure that our coverage meets demand across our growing community. This budget also contains $2.3 million to keep our police salaries competitive for recruitment and retention. Based on this assessment, the pay scale for the police department will be revised to show market competitiveness so that we can fill the positions that we need to fill. Also, fire rescue. I mentioned that they've been a part of this staffing study, and we also are getting multi-year recommendations to improve and be able to increase efficiency and do the most we can do with the money that we have. I mentioned earlier about the FEMA Safer Grant program. That is a federal program that we have successfully used over about the last 5 years to hire additional professional paid firefighters with federal money. We compete for those grants, and we've been successful about 4 times so far. Those grants have a 3-year shelf life, and we are at the end of that 3-year shelf life, and we're beginning to take those federally funded positions and we're switching them into local funding. You see on the page that that's about $1.7 million for next year in order to pay for the positions that were previously hired with federal funding. These positions have helped us to be able to address volunteer shortages across the county. We have a wonderful relationship with our volunteer fire rescue departments across the county, but it has become increasingly difficult for our wonderful volunteers to be able to meet all of the expectations 24/7, 365 days a year. So we've began this process several years ago to make sure that our calls for service remain consistent. In addition to that, we are also going to provide $1.3 million in the next year in order to maintain salary competitiveness in fire rescue for recruitment and retention. This budget also includes the addition of 3 new sheriff deputy positions. With the opening of the new court facilities this past year and more facilities coming online in the future, these positions are being added to assist with the day-to-day operations of the office, as well as courthouse and courtroom security, inmate transportation, and civil processing. Let's take a closer look at our public schools and the proposed budget that will help to support them for next fiscal year. The proposed budget supports a $304.9 million budget for public schools for operating expenses in fiscal year 27. This represents a 7.3% budget increase since last year. I'd like to take a second and look at that more closely and break it down. As you probably know, school funding is a combination of both state and local contribution. For next year, the combined contribution for schools increase is $20.7 million. That includes $11.7 million from the state and a local contribution that's recommended to grow by $9 million. When you add those two numbers together, that gives the total amount of additional school funding that's recommended for next year. Again, $20.7 million. This will allow the schools the necessary money they need, the $4.3 million that's shown on the slide, to adequately open and operate 2 new schools for next year. In addition to that, I am also recommending $6.4 million be placed in an out-year CIP reserve. That's our Capital Improvement Program reserve. It's a placeholder for future capital needs and consideration. Or it could also be used over the next several years as a reserve for schools if state funding were to unexpectedly decrease in the next cycle. When we look at it over the last several years, it has been unpredictable as to what state funding looks like. And at times, it's took swings in as much as $10 to $11 million. And so this $6.4 million held into the reserve for the next several years could help us to adequately address a shortfall if one comes from the state. The operational funding that is recommended for schools next year will be able to, as I've said, fund operations for the 2 new schools that are opening for next year. That's Mountain View Upper Elementary and Ace Academy at Lambs Lane. And it will also fully able to meet obligations of the public schools collective bargaining agreement, including salary increases for support staff, teachers, and additional positions that will be needed for increased planning time and guaranteed lunch breaks for teachers. Finally, before we leave schools, I also want to take a step back, and I want to take a look, as this slide shows, total revenue for the public schools operating budget since fiscal year 16. As I mentioned on the previous slide, the school's operating funding for next year is projected to go up 7.3%. If you look on average how much public school funding has gone up since fiscal year 16, It is approximately 5.8% every year. That's on average. As you can see from fiscal year 16 through fiscal year 21, that was lesser of an average. And then as you go from fiscal year 22 through 27, you can see the increases uptick. And as I said, it's 7.3%. This period of time since fiscal year 16 incorporates a wide range of changing circumstances, such as tax rate increases for public education, the opening of school additions, changing in state funding, as well as the effect of the pandemic's initial revenue decline, followed by the historically strong revenue growth that followed it. I'm also going to take a couple of minutes now and talk about affordable housing. That is always a hot topic in our community. For fiscal year 27, the Board of Supervisors' proposed budget will invest $7.5 million in the Affordable Housing Investment Fund, known as AHIF. The county also continues to invest in initiatives to expand affordable housing options for our community. Efforts focus on increasing the supply of affordable homes and rental units in Albemarle County, supporting workforce housing, and assisting residents in securing stable housing. Since the Affordable Housing Investment Fund was created in fiscal year 19, Albemarle has invested $24.5 million into affordable housing projects and programs. Funding for these projects and programs came from a variety of sources, including the Affordable Housing Investment Fund, American Rescue Plan Act funding, and the Human Services Funding Program allocations. These investments have helped to support the construction and preservation of 1,703 units of affordable housing, as well as shelter and supportive services for over 280 victims of domestic violence and 539 individuals experiencing homelessness. It's also helped to provide housing counseling and navigation support for over 788 individuals and families. There are other expenditures that support affordable housing by keeping people in the homes they've already got. For an example, in the fiscal year 27 budget, it also includes a 20% increase to the tax relief and elderly and disabled program that we have in Albemarle County. This provides real estate and mobile home tax exemption for taxpayers who qualify for this program. And finally, the Albemarle County Emergency Relief Program. It's intended to assist eligible clients with potential utility disconnections and to ultimately avoid eviction. There is $360,000 in that line item in next year's proposed budget. Take a second and I'll talk about our commitment to key environmental services in our community. In next year's budget, we have a continuation of a dedicated water resources funding that will continue to cover water resources operating and debt service payments, as well as to continue to fund for a reserve for future CIP projects. Also, in next year's budget, we have $300,000 earmarked for the climate action funding. The Department of Facilities and Environmental Services has also reprioritized staff time next year to focus on the implementation of some key climate action projects. Those projects include residential energy improvements, county building energy efficiency programs, as well as climate action collaboration initiatives and others. We also have a plastic bag tax. This is really another example of tax-based diversification where the board, under state law, was able to pass a plastic bag tax several years ago in Albemarle County. I believe that's a 5-cent charge at retail establishments in Albemarle County if you choose to take a plastic bag. That tax generates about $140,000 a year. It's very specific what we can do with this money that we collect. It has to be for environmental programs aimed at cleaning up the community. And so what we have with this money is roadside litter cleanup programs, as well as a distribution program of using reusable bags to our most vulnerable population. So since December of 2024, the plastic bag funded roadside litter cleanup programs have collected over 3,900 bags of litter. And it helps to promote the ongoing work of the volunteer roadside cleanup programs that are already alive and well in Albemarle County. Economic development. I've talked about that earlier as part of our tax diversification strategy in Albemarle County. In next year's budget, the recommended funding is $4.15 million. That's one-time funding that would go into the Economic Development Fund. This fund was designed to provide ready, flexible funding to support economic development opportunities. We do not always know what those economic opportunities are going to be and when we're going to get it. So that fund has to be ready for us to use because timing is critical. We learned during the AstraZeneca attraction last year that our ability to provide quick response and answers as the company considers where they're going to take their next project, and it luckily landed in Albemarle County, we needed to be able to provide fast answers on what infrastructure might look like that would help them make their decision. We need to always balance cash on hand against these unknown future opportunities. Having a sufficient fund available gives us a stronger, more competitive ability to be able to look for these companies that match well for what our needs are. A stable workforce. As the community grows, the scale and complexity of service delivery also increases. Our staff must develop the skills that we need in order for them to help with our community's needs and the complex problems that we face every day. Recruitment and retention of talented and skilled employees for Albemarle County is just as important as it is in the private sector. Consistent with past budgets and the county's compensation philosophy, the FY27 budget includes the review of classified staff, our pay scales, looking at everything at least on a 2-year cycle, making sure that we stay market competitive. It also includes a 2% cost of living adjustment as well as consideration of a one-time bonus at some point in time next year for classified staff. We also will provide training and development for our staff in next year's budget. We have $1.4 million earmarked. We also have to maintain a competitive and helpful healthcare fund. Healthcare costs are rising across the United States, and we will put 8% more money into our healthcare fund next year to combat rising healthcare costs. I want to take a minute and talk about how important our partner agencies are with the community services that they provide. Albemarle County cannot do the work that we do by ourselves. We lean hard into our collaborative relationships with our outside agencies. You can see on this slide that we've got $40.7 million recommended to fund 69 partner agencies across Albemarle County. All of these agencies are very, very important to the work that we do. I'll just quickly point out that some of the most critical service areas include public safety. That's our E911 call center, as well as our regional jail. Public transit and the partnership that we have with the City of Charlottesville, CAT and John. Libraries and tourism are so important to the quality of life in our community, and we will continue funding these key agencies, as well as a $4.1 million investment to health and welfare. That's Region 10 in the Blue Ridge Health Department. And then finally, $3.5 million for public works with those partner agencies. In the Human Services Funding Program, again, 30 programs are recommended to be funded next year. $1.6 million. That's a 7.2% increase from the current year, and it will allow for expanded support, which is needed. The Human Services Funding Program will support essential services like shelters, food security, and emergency assistance for our most vulnerable residents. Okay, we're about to wrap up, but before we do, let's take a quick look at our CIP, our Capital Improvement Program, and our debt services. Really, folks, there are 5 projects that are driving our CIP. These 5 projects, the Courts Complex, the Ravenna Futures property purchase, and the construction of 3 new schools. These projects alone total $296 million, and they create a funding obligation for the next 20 years. The county's debt service is the county's mortgage payment, and when I talk about out-year obligations, the need to do multi-year budgeting and make sure that we've got enough revenue to cover our out-year obligations. This includes the county's projected debt service payment. So when I talk about these 5 largest projects, I'll give you an example of how our mortgage will grow over the next 5 years. It's currently at $34 million a year, And by the 5th year of our CIP, fiscal year 31, that $34 million mortgage payment will grow to $55 million. We have to do adequate financial planning to be able to cover the cost for our obligations that we've made today all the way through the next 20 years. This is a summary slide showing the capital improvement plan in our public schools. It totals $196.8 million. And you can see over the next 5 years a continued commitment to investment to schools CIP. Let's look at the CIP for local government, because our CIP is a joint CIP that covers local government projects and schools projects. You can see for the next 5 years with local government, it's $160.3 million. And you can see that in years 3 through 5, that's fiscal year 29 through 31, there's not as many green check marks. That's because we're taking a very cautious approach as we work toward years 29 through 31 to make sure that we understand what our capacity is going into the next 5-year period and that we don't overcommit. I'm wrapping up. This is my last slide, and I want for you, please, to take a couple of key takeaways. Our obligations in Albemarle County continue to rise. Our service demands are evolving, and as our service demands evolve, we've got to train our staff and we've got to pay attention to be able to adequately meet the community's needs. We're actively working to diversify our tax base. We need to plan ahead, and we will continue to for our significant investments. And finally, prudent multi-year planning will help us to continue to shape this community's future. Thank you so much for tuning in and learning more about the proposed fiscal year 27 budget. We encourage you to attend an upcoming town hall or a public hearing. And of course, if you've learned from this presentation today, share what you've learned with your friends, your family members, to strengthen our community's understanding of this budget development process. Again, thank you for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day.